Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
And thank you so much for joining our Economic Development, Land Use, Housing and Zoning Committee. Um, Today is May 6th, 2025, and we are joined by our esteemed members of the board, along with NYCHPD, to provide a presentation on affordable housing 101. This is a presentation that we were very much looking forward to, given recent development or continuing development in our city. And some of our members in this community were expressing an interest to learn more about the language used and the definitions and criteria. I do apologize because obviously we wanted to have a bigger turnout in this room. However, I think that each one of the individuals participating today is a great ambassador of the community board, and we will definitely make sure to disseminate this information so that more members can benefit from it. And I'm confident that this will not be the last conversation that we have on this topic. So on that note, I would like to give the opportunity to my members of the community board and staff members of the community board to introduce themselves, and then introductions from the HPD team. Starting from my right.
Good evening, everyone. Susan Camerata. I'm the vice chairman of this committee.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Calzado, and I am the young adults chair.
Hello, everyone. I'm Argelia Ortiz. I'm a member of the community board.
On which committee, Argelia?
Oh, I belong to a variety of committees, but this is the Land Trust Committee that I belong to, and happy to be here. Okay.
Oh, you were speaking immigration.
Yes.
Hello, we just started introducing
Hi,
ourselves.
Michael.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Michael. Good evening, Michael. How wonderful. You made
Doing
it.
well, thank you.
My mother, Maria, is also a special guest tonight.
Good evening, Diana Leonard,
Sonia Orwell.
Community Associate with the Bronx Community Board 1.
I am Alan Beckerman. I'm a senior borough planner on the Bronx planning team at HPD.
Wendy Campbell, I'm the deputy director of the Bronx Planning Office.
Hi, I'm Astrid Walker Stewart. I am also senior borough planner on the Bronx team. Good evening, everyone.
I'm Ted Weinstein, I'm HPD's Director of Bronx Planning. I've been here many times.
Good evening, everyone. Michael Pimentel, not board member, community member, sorry. Can't make that mistake.
Good evening, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen. Anthony Jordan, District Manager to the board. I want to welcome everyone to tonight's meeting. As the chair mentioned, we are joined by senior borough officials from our HPD Bronx Planning Office. At the request of the board, Madam Chair, we are presenting for knowledge and information, specifically for Community Board 1, about affordable housing, one-on-one terminologies, and other knowledge to understand as we as a community board and you guys as members to vote knowledgeably and effectively on and understanding terminologies around the community board. The team from HPD had specifically made this presentation to help have a better understanding about HPD work and financing projects in the district. And again, we are broadcast live on our YouTube channel, Bronx CB1. And when you're speaking for the first time, please say your name clearly and concisely first so that the audio system that's recording this meeting can be able to make sure we take accurate meeting. Thank you, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen. HPD, you're on.
Okay, I'm again Winifred Campbell, the deputy director of HPD's Bronx Planning Office, and good evening. We thank you for allowing us to come and do this presentation for you today. What we're going to do is we're going to present Affordable Housing 101. And at the end of the presentation, we will answer any questions that you may have. Next slide, please. So, before we can start talking about Affordable Housing 101, we first have to unpack the affordable housing crisis here in New York City. Next slide, please. What is affordable housing? The loose definition of affordable housing is where a household pays no more than 30% of its annual gross income for rent and utilities. For example, you have a family that makes $50,000 a year. That family should not pay any more than $1,250 for rent and utilities. Next slide, please. Of course, the reality is housing costs are too high. It's very expensive to house a family. A family or a household is considered rent burdened when they spend more than 30% of their annual income for rent and utilities. And a family is considered severely rent burdened when they're spending 50% or more of their annual income for rent and utilities. Now, how does this translate for Community Board 1? About 62% of the renters in this community board are paying more than 30% of their income for rent and utilities. And about 36% of the renting household in Bronx Community Board 1 are paying 50% or more for rent and utilities. These numbers are pretty much the same throughout the Bronx. And it's a little bit higher for all of New York? No, the numbers are higher?
Yeah, more rent burden than.
More rent burden for more of New York. Thank you very much. Next slide. Now, what contributes to this? What is happening is that not enough housing is being built. What this graph shows is housing production. That's the bar graph. And you see in 1920 and 1960 is when most of the housing in this city was built, especially in the Bronx. The line graph shows population. You see the dip in the 70s and 80s, there's a decline in population, but since 1980, the population in this city has continued to increase. But when you look at the bar graph, production is not keeping up with the increase in population. So what does that cause? That means for every vacant unit, there's more competition for that unit. And at that rate, this leads to us having a low vacancy rate. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Every 2 years, the city puts out a housing vacancy survey. And among other things, this survey measures the vacant units in this city. If the vacancy rate is less than 5%, the city is considered in a crisis. And the last vacancy rate that the city released was last year, and that number was 1.4%. The city hasn't seen a vacancy rate that low in a very long time. Now, this vacancy rate does not tell the whole story, because 1.4% includes market rate as well as affordable. When you're looking at the affordable, let's take this hypothetical family in Community Board 1. Bronx Community Board 1, you have a family of 3. They make $3,000 a month, and they're looking for housing. Their vacancy rate is not 1.4%, it's 0.4%, and this is an issue. Next slide, please. So not only do we have a problem that we're not building enough housing, the other problem is that housing is unevenly distributed through the city. Many of you remember the City of Yes for Housing Opportunities. That was passed in December by our city council. This initiative was to have more housing throughout the city. And the reason for this is that, as you know, there are 59 community districts in this city. 10 community districts produced more housing than the other 49 put together. So that only speaks to all the housing. When you're talking about affordable housing, that is unevenly distributed through our city as well. What this slide is showing is that for the years 2014 to 2022, those 8 years, nearly 86,000 new affordable homes were built in this city. When you look at this map, there are some areas that you don't see any color, no growth of affordable housing. And then you see other areas like the South Bronx, Bronx Community District 1, where it's very dark because a lot of affordable housing has been produced in these areas. Now, one of the reasons for this is, if you remember the 70s and the 80s, Bronx was burning, neglect, abandonment. The city became the owner of a lot of land. So in areas like the South Bronx, where the city had a lot of land, when the city has a mandate now to build housing, what tools are in our toolbox? Where are we going to build? We're going to build where we have the land. And that's why you have areas like Community District 1 in the South Bronx with so much affordable housing. I will now turn the presentation over to Ashley.
Thank you. Hello again, I'm Ashley Walker Stewart, and I'm going to be looking at how does HPD address the housing crisis. I'm going to break down some of these as technical language that you probably see very often, and then look at some of the programs that we do to address the housing crisis. Next slide, please.
I'm wondering if the HPD team just wants to come and sit at the table. I'm sorry. So that it is easier for everyone to see you. I'm sorry I didn't say that earlier because I've been struggling here. My neck is.
Are you able to see?
Yeah, we can see the screen. I think it's hard to see the
I think
speakers.
maybe you're too far away.
Yeah.
I'm good, I'm good.
I can see it. I'm going. And I have the.
So, starting off, in order to understand what we do and how we do it, we need to understand the metrics or the data that we use to inform our process. Area median income is they're probably words that you've heard a lot, but it is not always the easiest to understand. But as the name suggests, it is the midpoint of a specific area's income distribution. It's a really key reference point to set income limits and requirements for new housing that responds to the affordability needs of New York. It is set on an annual basis by the federal government. And so New York City is part of the New York metro area. So that includes, obviously, of course, the 5 boroughs and a few suburbs. So it is quite expansive and covers obviously a range of different individuals in these areas. In 2025, for a family of 3, the area median income for a family of 3, so we refer to this as 100% AMI, is just below $146,000. So that's for a family of 3. This number is a reference point, and HPD typically finances projects that serve households with incomes up to 80% of the 100% AMI. So we use this as a reference point, sort of a key piece when we're looking at area median income. Next slide. So HPD, you'll see a table on the screen, and it shows 30% AMI to 80% AMI. And so the majority of HPD's projects we finance range from 30% to 80%. And so just zooming in, because I know there's a fair amount of stuff on the screen. If you're a family of 3 people and you're making an income of $43,000, you would be eligible for a 2-bedroom, thank you, Ted, a 2-bedroom apartment at maximum rent of $10.50 a month. So these are all maximum, so theoretically your income could be lower and your rent could be lower. So these are maximum thresholds. Next slide. Oh, I also should mention that our projects have a mix of units at different rents and different income levels, so to generally create mixed income projects. So you could have a cluster of units in the 30% AMI, a cluster in the 50, 80, etc. It depends on the project and the kind of finance program that HPD uses. Next slide, please. So our mission, these are sort of the core values. First and foremost, or not first and foremost, we want to ensure housing quality. We have a code enforcement team that conducts housing inspections and issues housing violations. They're very busy. In 2023, they conducted over 700,000 inspections and issued over 700,000 housing violations. Our second goal is to preserve existing affordable housing and create new affordable housing. So since 2014, we have financed over 86,000 new affordable homes and preserved 150,000 existing affordable homes. And here, we'll go over a number of our projects, but just to start talking about them, Maria Lopez Plaza is a preservation project where they did a gut rehab of the interior to make sure it's safe and habitable. Brook Gardens is very interesting. It's a gut rehab of a former casket factory. And just the architecture is quite interesting, but so we do a range of development. And then thirdly, our mission is to engage New Yorkers to strengthen neighborhoods, and we do this by doing community-led neighborhood plans. We have education. We're part of that outreach about housing resources and rights. And we also have community engagement for publicly owned sites as well. Next slide. So we create new affordable housing by financing these projects at 100% affordable housing on both public and private property. We provide financing tools to developers in exchange for housing affordability. We also administer zoning and tax incentives. So mandatory inclusionary housing, MIH for short, requires a portion of new housing in rezoned areas to be affordable housing. There are different options, but that's generally what MIH does. Universal affordability preference allows buildings in medium and high density areas to add 20% more units as long as they are income restricted and also affordable housing. We do a lot, but most housing development in New York City that occurs is built without HPD. 2/3 of the homes built in New York City since 2014 are market rate. And as we know, market rate isn't affordable. And then a significant portion of these projects are also as of right, which means that they don't require any city approval or sort of oversight through the public review process. Next slide. HPD's new construction finance programs, we offer a variety of different ways to build affordable housing. We have multifamily rentals. We have some fun names for them. ELLA, which stands for extremely low income. And this is for projects that are for low income residents. Neighborhood construction program is for smaller scale projects. And then mix and match is exactly what the name sounds like. It's mixed incomes. You offer a different affordability levels over range. We also have senior and supportive housing programs to finance those. Our senior affordable rental apartments creates apartments for seniors, 62 plus, with on-site services. And then our supportive housing loan program creates permanent affordable housing for formerly homeless New Yorkers, as well as residents with disabilities, with on-site services. And then lastly, we have our affordable homeownership program, and we're trying to encourage homeownership for multifamily and smaller scale development as well. And most of you may be familiar with New York City's housing lottery, but this is where all of the projects exist. So this is how you apply. All projects that receive HPD funding or tax incentives are on this website. It's called New York City Housing Connect. It is a fairly straightforward process, but obviously it's also available in different languages, but technology is challenging sometimes. So we have ambassadors to help you in that process. In CD1, the housing ambassadors are Bronxburg, Nostradamus, and Stonewall CTC. And then I believe I'm passing on to Ted Weinstein.
Thank you, Ashley. So what we've just shown you are basically what the mission is, what the crisis is, what the problem is, what HPD, what the cities of HPD does to try to deal with it as much as possible, what the programs are. I have to say before we go on that any one of these slides that we just showed could be a half hour to an hour discussion all by itself. These are really complicated issues in some cases, not always correctly well known as they might be, but there's a lot really behind a lot of this. We're hoping when we get to the question and answer period, we'll be happy to answer the questions that maybe we didn't quite get to cover, or that you want to know exactly how it works better. But we do want to show you, for all of this process, stuff gets done. We want to, and particularly in this district has had one of the highest amount of new construction created in the entire city. I think those of you who have lived here for a while, have seen that. Occasionally I'll take a friend, who has not been in the Bronx and show them around. They have this image of the South Bronx from the 1970s and 1980s, and they can't believe what they see. There has been a tremendous amount of new housing built in this district, in the entire South Bronx during these years. And there's more to go. I mean, we talked about city-owned properties. Not many left in terms of city-owned properties, and we will get to a section that just shows you some of the ones that we're working on now that will be coming up and will be coming to you, to get you presentations made to you, and then that in many cases that you'll be voting on as well. But first, we want to talk about some of the things we have done. We're going to show you pictures of some of the projects. Some of them you may know, some of them may not, but they only represent a small amount of all that's been done in this area. Okay, we make the point, since 2014, over 5,600 new affordable units have been built in this district on either city-owned land or private land that used out financing. Over 30% of these units are affordable to households making 50% of the AMI or less. Now, when I say since 2014, a lot was done before that. We recently did a presentation about Melrose Commons, and the first new construction in Melrose Commons was done in 1999, 2000. Those were the first homes were built. So we're talking about since then, and a lot was done even before that in other areas. So we're talking about a lot was done even before 2014 and a lot since 2014. Next slide, please. And these again, just to show you some of them, I'll just briefly say, where they are, or something about them. La Centrale is a big development that's just outside the hub. It was done, it resulted in RFP, where, we'll talk about that in a minute. That's how a lot of these development teams are selected. This was a 5-building cluster was proposed. 2 of the buildings were the persons built. I'll just mention that just last week, the last 2 sites, the 3 of the buildings are built, the last 2 sites, what we call C and E, were closed on. So they should be starting, those are the ones that are more northern part of the, like closer to, behind what used to be the municipal garage. There's a big block there, and a little triangular lot. So they should start construction very soon on those. La Terraza, there was another RFP which offered, again, a cluster of 4 or 5 different sites to build on. This was one of them. This is in Melrose Commons. Crossroads Plaza is at 149th and Southern Boulevard. There used to be a gas station there and mostly empty land for a long time. There were 3 buildings built there. As well, a lot of these have commercial space, stores, or community facility space. 425 Grand Concourse, one of the gems of the area and of our programs. This is the one on the corner of 144th and the Grand Concourse. It's 26 stories. It was one of the very first and largest buildings built in the country using the passive house method of design to save energy. It's right next to a park that had to be closed because it was dangerous. Things weren't able to be built there. And so what happened was we sort of fed off each other because HPD was financing doing the building. The Parks Department, with help from local officials, more quickly rebuilt that whole park. Right next to it. By the way, I sometimes say we build, and I want to be clear. We don't actually build anything. It was said earlier, we provide land when available, we provide financing, and we provide tax incentives. Okay, next slide, please. And these are all low or mixed income rentals. The next group is Park Haven, 147th and,
Okay.
okay. It's right opposite the health center. And then Via Verde, of course, that's another highlighted project that's right across from where La Centrale is, 156th and Brook. And again, it's a tower and lower rise. The tower is a rental. St. Anne's Terrace is another complex that was built. That's behind Melrose Court, a little bit to the east of the hub. It's where there were breweries historically, a lot of breweries that were originally on that land that closed down and then were torn down to build the buildings, to build housing. When they were excavating to build St. Anne's Terrace, they came across a lot of old artifacts from the breweries. And the Altona. The Altona is within Melrose Commons on 156th Street. This developer decided to try something different. He put wind turbines, windmills on the roof to try to create another source of energy. When you walk by, if it's a windy day, you can see them turning. Actually, he decided that he took the risk, but it doesn't really provide enough to make it worthwhile. But he did. He wanted to try it one time. Next slide. In addition to the low moderate or mixed income rentals, we have the ownership problem, home ownership. When the South Bronx first started to have a lot of efforts to rebuild, so the banks were not willing to fund. There's lots and lots of empty land in order to build on. And so the feeling, both desire and out of the need, a lot of the early construction and development that was done was small homes, 2 and 3 family homes. And then later on, let's say between 1990 and 2000, that's when banks started opening up and things started happening in order to be able to do like more multifamily. And now, in the past few years, there's been sites that were originally planned to do small homes, and instead we've done apartment buildings, multifamily, because it can be done. The banks are willing to lend. And so here are some examples of some early small homes. Sunflower Way, that's in Melrose Commons. It's off of Elton Avenue, going west. The Nehemiah Homes Group, an organization called South Bronx Churches, basically said to the city, give us the land and then we'll build housing. And so they built a lot of also 3-family homes it was very common for them to have, and the way that these homes work, these small homes, is that it's sold to a homeowner, and then the homeowner rents out the other two apartments, and that provides them the income to then maintain the house and run the house. Around 2018, I'm sorry, 2008, 2010, that's when there was a national housing crisis, a budget crisis, there was a lot of foreclosures, very few foreclosures of homes built, small homes built through our programs, because they were set up that way in order to have the income that was used to pay the mortgages. We also were trying to do now more multifamily homeownership, co-ops. So these are two that we've done so far. The Orion, which is in Melrose Commons, it was one of the cluster of sites. And again, the tower, I'm sorry, the lower rise, smaller ones of the Verde, those are co-ops as well. Okay, next slide, please. Now, we have a division that's called the Division of Special Needs Housing, Special Needs Housing. We have the seniors. We want to make sure that there's sufficient affordable housing for seniors. They tell us that the waiting list to get into the senior buildings is enormous. So we try to do as much as we can of that. In this area, again, there's Tre Fuente, which Wishfish did, which is down on 138th Street, or 3rd Avenue. The Casa de Felicidad, that's also in Melrose Commons. These are both senior buildings, that have to be 62 or over to apply. And then earlier, there's the Brook, was done by a group called Breaking Ground. And there were some other supportive housing buildings also spread around the district. Okay, next slide, please. And now I'll turn it over to Adam, and he'll talk about some of the projects that we're currently working on. And that they'll be coming, again, like I said, they'll be coming to you in the future to give presentations and to talk to you about them specifically. Thank you.
Everyone, again, I'm Adam Beckerman on the Bronx planning team. So as Ted said, I'm going to talk about some upcoming projects, actually some that we've given informational presentations to this board before. So next slide. Oops, the direction. So before I do that, I wanted to kind of talk about the RFP process, because a lot of these projects that we've talked about and a lot of the projects that I'll be talking about in the next slides came out of what we do when we have city-owned land. And one of the missions that we talked about at HPD is that we, provide financing, and oftentimes that can be on private sites, but we have a lot more control when we're talking about our city-owned sites. So oftentimes when we have a city-owned site and we decide to RFP it, the first process is to come to the community board, come out to the community, and do tabling, do surveys, we'll have workshops. And the goal of this is to collect as much data as possible to create a community visioning report. And what we do with the community visioning report is we add it to the request for proposals. So when development teams apply and we, rate them based of when we score them, we're looking at how well they responded to the community visioning report, or what you all said is your priorities on like what types of housing, also like what types of community facilities you like to see. Here's an example of one that I think our most recent RFP in your district, 351 Powers. It was kind of awkwardly over the pandemic or a little bit after the worst part of the pandemic. So a lot of stuff was done online, but we tabled. I think we had an online workshop. So next slide. We, through our RFP process, we received, all the submissions, and we designated a development team. So this is what the development team came up for 351 Powers. It'll be an 84-unit building using our ELA program. And I believe we actually presented a couple months ago, just highlighting some of the aspects of it. The other project I want to highlight is Melrose Commons B2. We also, I believe, presented 2 or 3 months ago. Melrose Commons B2 is interesting because, as Ted was kind of highlighting some of the projects before, La Terraza, the Orion. This was part of the same RFP back in, I believe, 2003. And there was 4 sites and there was a problem, well, not really a problem, there was an active rail line going through them. So to speed up one of the sites, site B, we split into B1 and B2, and B1 was developed on the part without the railroad trench. Since then, we've come into ownership of the entire rail trench, and we are now proceeding with B2. So it's a 214 unit building, also using our ELA program. Next slide, please. And our upcoming project in your district is 110 East 138th Street, the 63 Exterior Street. And this is a 2-building project, also using 2 different programs. So one of the buildings will be a senior housing, that's the smaller one, with 183 units. And the bigger one will be 354 units using our ELA program. Now this will be located right next to Madison Bridge. This is interesting because there was a city-owned site and a privately owned site. It was a auto auction, and then the city-owned site was Padded Wagon, so it was like a moving company. So we were able to combine those 2 sites to create this kind of bigger site. What's interesting is that, it's on the river, and there's requirements around waterfront open space. So we've been working with the development team and different city agencies to create publicly accessible open space along the river. Next slide, please. Going back, as I said before, when it's not a city-owned site, but it's a private developer comes for our financing, we will provide that. Here's an example, actually not that far from the previous site near Madison Bridge, 261 Walton Avenue. They're taking a private rezoning, and HPD financing will be 206 units.
That's for the, what's currently there is that gas station, right?
Gas station is just below that.
Right,
This is like a little.
so the gas station will remain there, is the plot of land behind?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, next slide, sorry. Okay, and then I'll talk about some future RFP sites. So a lot of the projects we highlighted was in Melrose Commons, which was a big initiative, that Winnie had worked on for years, or the urban renewal area. So we have mostly built all the sites and B2 is one of those sites, but we have about one relatively large site left, which is Urban Renewal Site 16, 3154 3rd Avenue. So I don't think there's an announcement yet on when that will be RFP'd, but it's in the pipeline in the near future to be part of an RFP. The other one I want to highlight is 320 Concord Avenue. So this is located on one site of the borough-based jail site. So they're on one side of the lot, they're going to be building the borough-based jail. And as part of that agreement with the community, part of it was reserved for affordable housing. So once a certain portion of the jail is built, we will start the RFP process for the affordable housing portion, which is highlighted here. Next slide. That's it. So that has some questions.
Okay, thank you all for giving us the opportunity to do this. I hope it's helpful. And again, a lot of these are much more detailed than the time that we can spend on them. But again, it's good to know at least somewhat what some of these things are. I'm sure there were questions about some of the terminology, and what happens and how they're really used. So again, we thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you. Very good. I do have a question. Are we open for questions
Yes,
now?
yeah.
Okay.
Should we sit here?
Yeah,
Yeah, well, come on over and sit right over here with us. Might as well, yeah. Great, good.
Archie, before we go ahead and start taking questions, I'm wondering, is any of this information available for Bronx residents in other languages?
A lot of the, I don't know if all of our, well, we have a website, which is excellent. There's a lot of information, a lot of detail. I really don't know, to tell you the truth, about how much of that is available. When we do specific things, like notices, flyers, things like that, generally speaking, those are translated usually in Spanish. But in general, the city has a language program where things can be, and that's for a number of different languages, things can be translated like that. There's a way of getting into the system so that they translate.
Yeah, I wonder if it'll be of value for this group, because I feel like whenever I am presented with this information, although I have like an urban planning training, I have to digest the information in English and then kind of like make sense of it in Spanish. So I'm wondering if your office, the Board of Presidents, as you embark on hosting this type of presentations, other than in community boards, but also in the community boards, if providing these presentations in other languages has been considered.
I think it really depends on some, I'll give you an example. Just the other day, we did a presentation, the development that we pointed out, that was on what is now the padded wagon site by the Madison Avenue Bridge. So there's gonna be a senior building. And so when the development team started working with us, we said to them, we want you to see and to hear from seniors, what do they want to see at that location? What kind of features, what needs to be done to make that a better location? Because, that's right by the bridge, there's a lot of traffic there. And so we told the development team, get together, get some kind of a meeting with some seniors. And they worked with the council members' office, and they had at the senior center on 138th Street by Tre Puente. So we had the meeting just the other day. There were about yesterday.
Last Thursday.
That's it. There were about close to 30 people there who were there for the senior center, and they sat through a presentation. And the point of this is the leaflet, the flyer that was made that went out was in Spanish as well.
Yeah, I think it's so important, and also very important for people to understand, although this is the thing, when people are looking for the resources that they might have access to, especially when it comes to housing, there's so much information out there, but at the same time, let me try to frame this so you can understand what I am trying to say. There are so many programs out there, but for folks on the ground, they just know whether it is something they can afford or not. They don't know the policy behind it. I don't know the policy behind it for some of these things. So for the ELA, for the NCP, for the SARA, for the SHLP, I think it's important for folks to know, because then it comes to, city government is not doing anything, but they don't know the programs that are available. That's a problem. On the other hand, and this question doesn't pertain to the constituency that we serve, more so on the developer's side. If at some point you can provide some information on some of the eligibility criteria for these developers to apply and actually qualify to submit proposals pertaining to these particular programs. I know we have some management and developers in the team. It'll be good for all of us to know what are some of these criteria. You mentioned something very important on the presentation, on the fact that there's a lot of low-income development housing happening within our district, right? I don't have a specific question on that, but anything that you could perhaps more insight that and if you can elaborate, right, on just the fact that we are building so much, and we are building a lot of low-income housing or more affordable housing. What are your thoughts as planners, right? As program managers, what are your thoughts? Because from my point of view, I see all of this development happening. We see the other buildings that are more market rates. I don't necessarily see a lot of change in the community though. I don't know, I just wanna share that with you because when I talk to small business owners, they complain so much about the fact that yes, we have all of this development, but the community doesn't seem to prosper.
Hmm.
And that's a real concern that I continue to hear all the time. So as planners, right, as city employees and public servants, I'm wondering what are your thoughts? Is this something actually good for our community? Or you've been in this business for so long, should we as members of this board, when we receive applications or requests for presentations, I'm not telling anyone what to do, but I guess that we also want to see that kind of like mixed development. Should we be encouraging that more? Should we be advocating more for that balance? Not to deny the fact that a lot of people can still not find housing that they can afford in our community. This is a big problem still. So I just want to hear your thoughts because you are you're in the nuts and bolts of this work.
I would just add to that, I know we've had so many conversations where I think we feel collectively that I think we are one of the highest, right, this district in new building. But, I'll use the word dumped in the sense of we get the most shelters, we get the most supportive housing, we get the most low income. So I think, again, to Paolo's point, it's that balance, like, to kind of like make the whole community, rather than just be an area that's known for, only the very lowest income. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, it's hard.
Okay, I mean, first, our program, we're the housing agency,
No, I know.
right? So, well, I mean, I'm not saying, well, go blame somebody else. I'm just saying that that's what we do. And our job is to facilitate affordable housing. And I think, part of the point of this is to show how much has been done. And what we actually don't show is the population of District 1. That, we're talking about District 1, and I actually have it with me, and the population in the 1980s and 90s went down tremendously. Lost, I was thinking it was 40-something% of the population.
Oh, yeah,
in
left.
District 1.
Yeah.
And then a lot of it has been recouped, it's come back. And so part of our responsibility, our job, is to make sure that there are housing opportunities for people who have lived through the bad times and want to be there for the good times. Second generation, third generation people. We've talked about at this committee about the young professionals, people who grew up in the neighborhood and would like to stay here. They've gotten good education, gotten good jobs, and they want to stay here. I saw a story on TV one time where they interviewed people who moved into some of the new towers, and that's a different story, but they were people who had grown up here, moved away to Queens or Brooklyn, and then came back because they did want to live in the neighborhood. So our job is to facilitate, to provide those housing opportunities. And at different levels, different income levels, different types of housing. That's why there's housing for seniors, housing for people who unfortunately were homeless, lower income, moderate income, and people who want to own, home ownership. So that's our part. At the same time, there are responsibilities, and we do have, we encourage local hiring. We have job training programs so that people can then try to get jobs as well. I mean, I'd like to say that, sitting here, I can say what the cure is for poverty, and of course I can. But the job is to provide as much opportunity as possible to people, including the people who live here. I have to say, and I know that like it's the way of looking at things, but all those big towers that have been built down next to the Deegan, up on 138th Street. I mean, people look and say, "Ooh, great! You know, the Bronx is a skyline." I'm not happy
Yeah,
because those are not affordable housing.
no kidding.
Now, even though they use a tax incentive program that then requires a certain percentage of the units to be affordable, the old law that allowed that, they weren't affordable. And that was the problem. So I look at every building that gets built like that as like it's a lost opportunity. I'm not happy.
Yeah.
It's why I want to make sure that we continue to facilitate affordable housing. 261 Walton is a good example. That's down in that area where it was all rezoned, the lower concourse waterfront area there. And these guys who bought that, and it went through ULIRP, they had to rezone, it went through ULIRP, so it means it came through the committee board. And they've been trying to make sure they could put together their financing to then proceed. And I tell our finance people, we have a separate division, I consider that to be a priority project, priority site, because these guys, in a minute, they can get people knocking on their door, you know, to buy the property from them to build another market rate tower.
Right.
And so, and I have to tell this story. I remember when it was voted on at this community board, there were a lot of tough questions. People gave them a hard time. And I said to Cedric, who was the dean at the time, I said, these guys should be rewarded. These guys should be applauded because they're willing to stay here in that area and, you know, not open the door for the people who are willing to pay them big bucks in order to do affordable housing. So those are some of the things that, you know, we contribute toward it. Ultimately, I wish there were more jobs, good paying jobs for more people. And I think that's part of it. I mean, obviously everybody knows that, you know, particularly around the hub, there's a bad drug problem still. You know, I tell people, like the people who don't know, who've never come to the South Bronx, I said, you know, is there still too much poverty? Yes. Is there still too much crime? Yes. But physically, the area is very different from what it was 30, 40 years ago. And I think that has to help some. But people who may not have been willing to live here 30, 40 years ago, or couldn't live here, you know, now are doing so. Does that help the person who themselves is on public assistance? You know, maybe not. But I'm guessing, I'm saying that there has to be some connection to help someone. It's not, and I was going to say something, and I don't mean this sarcastically or anything. Anybody who can really solve that problem, I'll make them the president. You know, because it's not a hard thing to do. And I think everyone who are people in the Bronx who care about the Bronx, you know, feel strongly. I know I've been talking too much, and I open my staff here to say whatever they think.
I think you said it all.
I just want to, if I may, yes, I was one of those people that lived here during the 70s and 80s. I was born and raised here in this neighborhood. I'll never forget those fires. I remember every other day. That was the so-called burned down Bronx. Now it's become a part of the archive. But there was a point in time, to one extent, very similar to what Paolo was saying. I really wonder sometimes, have we gone far or are we going backward? Well, that was back in the days when we were able to go to the Alexanders and get a job. We were able to go to the Yankee Stadium and get a job. That doesn't exist anymore. See, so I wonder, I mean, it's really strange because at a time when everything was considered a flat dungeon, is what because that's what they called us, a dungeon, a land that was all burned down, but there was still some kind of economic resources for everyone to be able to survive. That has disappeared, like you have said, okay? And I really wonder, so now it's like, yes, they have cleaned up the empty lots, because everything was a junkyard back then, literally speaking, and that was during the time when they felt a lot of the vandalism set in and so forth. But to one extent, there was still a means of direct survival. It doesn't exist anymore. Okay, you see, like you said, what the so-called hub has turned into. Okay, the so-called Third Avenue 149. And it does make me wonder, are we going forward or did we go backward on that level? But my main question this evening is the HPD system, if you could clear me on this, that's a lottery system, isn't it? And I know large populations of people that have continuously been applying and continuously get turned down. They don't get chosen. Okay, so that is a main concern to me, because where do these people go when they don't get chosen for that so-called affordable? And that it seems to be a gap. Are there any alternatives to bridge that gap? Because I know people that have been applying for some 20, 30 apartments, there's a list of them, and have not been chosen in that lottery system that exists. Where do they go now?
Okay, let us explain actually how
Okay.
that works first.
Mm-hmm.
The old system used to be, if there was a new building built and you wanted to apply for it, so you had to write to the managing company and they would send you an application to fill out, paper application, you send it back. And then if there was another building you wanted to apply to, you had to do the same thing for that building. Then we computerized the system. And now it's Housing Connect. And that's been revamped, it's been improved on. So what happens is you go into the system, and you may know this, you go into the system, you put in your profile, you know, who you are, how many people in the family, what the income is, you know, all that basic stuff. And then you send it in. That's all you have to do to begin with. You establish the profile. Not 6 times, 12 times, 15 times, once. You then look at the screen that says which buildings right now that are nearing finish, and that whole system of marketing and, you know, starts when a building is about 2/3 finished. So which buildings now are open for applications for people to apply? And then there's a list. Now, what you then do is you click on next to the buildings that you're interested in applying to. What happens is people just go click, 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 click. If there's 20 buildings, they click 20 levers. And what happens, that's one of the reasons that when you build a building of 100 apartments, and Susan can tell you this probably better than I can, you know, when you have a new building of 100 units, you could get 40,000 applications. A lot of them, I mean, for 2 reasons. The most important reason is because there's a affordable housing crisis, and people do want to look, and you're absolutely right about that. The other is the system is too good, too successful, and what happens is, so somebody, let's say somebody is living in Brooklyn, and they set the button, they go click, 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 and then they get called, and they get, well, first of all, let me say, when you have 40,000 people clicking for a 100-unit building, a lot of those people are never going to hear anything.
Right.
Because it's just never going to get to them.
Right.
You don't have to get to even, I don't know how many, 10,000 to fill up those 100 apartments, probably less. So a lot of people, when they complain, I never hear anything. That's true. They probably don't. But then that person in Brooklyn, what they will do very often is when they get maybe they get a notification that they're being offered a spot in the Bronx. But then they say, well, I don't want to live in the Bronx. I'm in Brooklyn. Well, that takes up a spot.
That's right.
And they, you know, our people have told me that the most important reason why applications are denied is that people are not within the income range, either too high or too low. The second most important reason is they don't show up. They don't even respond to the request. Because that's what happens. People like, I don't want to live in the Bronx. I don't want to live in Brooklyn. I live in the Bronx. That's what happens. But the system, it's made it very easy to apply, and that's on purpose. And we don't want to take it back. We don't want to say, well, it's too successful. But people do have to understand that and maybe that's something that we just don't do a good enough job of doing, is explaining that's how that works.
Yes, but
But
that's
part of
my
the
main
unintended-
question. My
I
main
think
question is,
The unintended consequence, though, is people can very easily apply for 20 sites. and they can go through the process because it's very simple to do,
Mhm.
to go through the process, and now you are taking up somebody else's spot, and then at the very end, it just delays things.
Right, but what happened, the person, if the person has not been chosen in that lottery system, they never get called. They're not gonna get called if they haven't even, because they have to go through a lottery system and then get chosen, and then it's when they get called. That's the procedure, right?
Well, yeah, you,
That's what I'm
You're-
saying,
the lottery, you apply,
yes.
it's a lottery, right? So
Mhm.
they're going to numerically choose someone, the computer numerically chooses who's number one.
Okay.
But if
Yes.
it's a 100-unit building and there's 40,000 applications
Mhm.
and you're number 20,000, you're not gonna get called.
Exactly, and that's what I'm saying, because I am aware of individuals that have applied for maybe over 100 apartments. I mean, because it's like you're saying, they got their profile in the system already. And it's a
It's because
computerized system.
there's not
That-
enough apartments.
And that's
out
my
there.
question.
the
So those
problem.
people who do not get chosen in the lottery, they're out.
Well, for that
Well,
building,
what
for that
alternatives-
building, for that project.
I can
For-
speak
for that
myself, 'cause
project.
I'm one of those that applied for about,
Mhm.
let me see, 51 pending currently. Why? Because as I apply, either they reach my number and then all of a sudden the apartment is missing. And
Mhm.
then.
I've seen that
um,
happen to many people.
my log number be in the trillions.
Yes.
No, it's not funny.
It's
But
not funny.
I
I'm
have
not
seen
right
many
now,
individuals
like,
go
and-
through.
And the
through
reason
that.
why I applied to multiple is because I never get called. Not
Yes.
for one or two or three. So I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
maybe if I apply, maybe in Brooklyn they'll call me.
Staten Island.
And then I thought that maybe if I was part of CB1, because it does say like,
Community
percentage,
preference.
that doesn't work at all. 'Cause
Well,
I have-
that-
yeah,
That's exactly what I'm
So,
saying, and I know
to
plenty
get-
of
to get called.
people who are going through
Let's not
that same
interrupt each other.
situation. Okay, well.
You have a question,
I'm
Anthony.
interrupting
Thank you, Madam Chair, if I may. So I have a couple of questions, if you give me
Yeah,
some
of course.
leverage. So just like, so like that system, while it was successfully created, like the members are saying, we should work harder to, trying to perfect a system that can evaluate a couple of things. It can evaluate whether a person has been on the list for 10 years and maybe their lottery number can matriculate in another piece in a higher number, or a lower number, sorry. Or maybe you should evaluate making sure that people who don't meet the income guidelines cannot particularly apply for a unit that does not fit the income piece, because there's a lot of things that I've learned from talking to developers and talking to the city during my lifetime in the city housing, where we find out that people apply for apartments that they know, according to income standards, they do not qualify. Their profile or automatically should lock them out of applying for a unit that's not, they have not updated their profile to qualify for, or their profile shows the income level does not, literally should say they should not qualify for. And so what it does take up a person like our board member said, she's been on there for 10 years. So the frustration comes that people end up applying for 20, 30, 50 apartments. And that becomes the primary concern about when we talk about affordability. And then you hear affordability, you apply for the apartment, you don't get chosen because you're number 20,000 on 100 list. And then you see luxury housing going up, and they have multiple units of vacant because they came in for the luxury units, and we only have a small percentage of those numbers that go to Housing Connect. I had and then we create these programs that are supposed to pay a subsidy to allow these families who come out of shelter or unhoused or doubled up with a relative member who can't even come in, and we had that whole issue about discrimination. So we talk about housing preservation development. We know that you guys are working very hard to try to preserve, to develop, and sustain affordability, but the frustration comes this from the consumer who has these different avenues. So we would love to have a more broader conversation about how we discuss how to perfect a system that we know has been around for, I give or take, about a decade, that where it should be tweaked at. And I get, when I used to develop housing in the South Bronx, taking all these applications, putting them in a big old garbage bag, shaking them up, and the old-fashioned way, going in and then log, and then go through the whole paper stuff, and then getting the person to come up with the paper. It is a very a tedious system. So I understand. So as we look at technology and we look at systems, I think it's important that we try to already kind of evaluate where it's likely not working, and maybe do every 3 years or 2 years evaluate how we can tweak it so that it can shrink the issue of board members who've come to me and said, I swear I've been on for 10 years and my income has showed, and I end up being the community preference, and I end up all those things. And I know it's an imperfect system. We're in an imperfect city, try to be as perfect as possible, but we have to, and I keep saying this everywhere I go, my team is tired of me, inspect what we expect or suspect. So we have to make sure that we are trying to figure out who's the other person somewhere in the back room who handles technology, who can be charged with this, trying to make this a big issue.
Okay, let me say a couple things. So first of all, no one else said it's very frustrating.
Yes.
But there is that phrase called the luck of the lottery. I mean, and that's for real here.
Yeah.
There's nothing nefarious. I mean, there's, like I said, and I'm just making up the numbers, but 100-unit building could get 20,000 applications.
But can we admit? I don't want to cut you off. Can we admit that at that 100-unit building, you may get and you get 10,000 applications, that maybe 5,000 of those people should never apply, should never qualify, and the system should show that even their profile, not submitting documents, if their profile is not updated, they should not income qualify for that application.
But most of the people will probably be qualified, are within the income range. So, yeah, I mean, I saw you're saying that they should just be kicked out right away.
Or the system should say.
The system does, like, let's say if I apply for a building that, like, let's say that's 34 and I make like 50 or 60, it will say no, that I can't apply to that building. But can there be a cap to the amount of people that apply to a building that has only 12 affordable housing, like apartments?
Then you're denying people the ability to apply.
Well, you're not picking us either way. Because my number is reaching 2 million. You never picking me. So it's like the fact that we are, and then the reason why.
I'll tell you what the problem
Wait,
is.
no, sorry. The reason why I'm applying to all these apartments is mainly because I'm never reaching the goal that you guys,
The agency is absolutely open to trying to improve the system, and always has. There was Housing Connect, there was an Housing Connect 2.0. There was just something just last week that on the rented apartments that they get vacated, it used to be that you used to have to go through the whole system to fill that one apartment 2J, so you don't have to. Now the landlord could just do it. So there definitely is a willingness to try to improve the system. The other proof of the pudding, though, is also that 100-unit building. It will have 100 affordable eligible people in it.
Right.
I mean, it may.
Then it should be a cap as soon as those applications are
Because they
filled.
cannot assume that everyone who applies is going to be immediately qualified.
No, I understand that, but
I'm
again.
sorry. I know we have so many questions and these affect us on a personal level. I do want to bring some things that are particular to the board business. And I know, Anthony, you also have a question. So
Yeah, I was going to finish the line thank you, Chair, before we allow you.
So when it comes to speaking of Brooklyn has some developments out there that are condos. So I would like to know, is it too hard for HPD to kind of like attract developers who want to develop condos in the South Bronx or in the Bronx in general, period? That's a question, because some people, I think, would want to invest in the Bronx long term. Why not condos? Is it so hard for the city, given the incentives that we have? So, when we have all of the developers come to present.
You want to talk about that for me?
I can either give you all my questions or give them to you one by one, because I have 3.
Yeah, I'll do one. Otherwise, I'm going to forget.
Let's do one by one then. Okay.
So we have the Open Door program, which is our program that is used to finance home ownership. We actually, it's almost always co-ops, because at one point, and I'm not a finance person, but it just works better as a co-op than as a condo. So that's what, New York has always been like that. Around the country, there were many, many more condos than there are co-ops. In New York, it's the opposite, and we're the only big city like that, for whatever reason. Tax purposes, I don't know. So if you're really asking is, how do we find developers who are willing to develop co-ops, homeownership? I wish they would. There have been times when I've had developers come in saying that, they have a piece of property, they want to get financing to build, and I would say to them, would you want to consider doing homeownership? Most don't. Many banks really aren't interested because when we say we provide financing, we don't provide 100% of the financing.
Right.
We provide financing that supplements the private financing that they get.
Mhm.
It's what keeps the income. You don't need as much income then from the building to pay it off because the city money, we don't collect. So, I guess I shouldn't say that. Again, and we also, it's somewhat a budget thing, that the budget only allows a certain, each of our programs, it gets a budget. This is how much money they're gonna have for the year to build on.
How about opportunities for small developers, in particular MWBEs, to go in business, and benefit from HPD financing opportunities or programs or incentives?
Okay.
I can talk a little bit about that. So sometimes we have specific MWBE RFPs. So to apply to be like, you have to be like majority, stakeholder in the application. So there's that. We specifically do that. But in most of our just normal RFPs, you have to have a certain level of MWBE ownership. So it's always a goal of HPD to build up capacity of, minority women-owned businesses.
Define that certain level of MWBE capacity. How do you measure that?
I think on normal RFPs, it has to be at least 25%.
Yeah, I think it's 20, I thought it was 20.
The ownership of the development?
Yes.
Or the ownership
Yes.
of the development. So the firm has to own 20% or so, and they can partner up with other bigger developers?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's used as like a mentoring type
Right.
of a system where, because we have people, we've done that,
Mhm.
right? Where they've been able then to branch out and go on their own
Okay.
eventually. So I think that's one
I
of the benefits.
So any information that could be provided about those programs or maybe examples that we could share with folks will be greatly appreciated as well.
The agency is looking to do another, I think Anna mentioned this, one of our next RFPs is gonna be specifically sites for MWBE. And, the building on Cortland,
Yes,
then one of Ward 3.
that's 784 Cortland.
Ward 3 probably. No, 74th by 401.
784.
That was-
the NW.
That was in an MWBE RFP.
Wait, wasn't that Infinite? Was that Infinite Horizons?
Yes,
They're, because they partnered with us.
Yeah.
Not on that particular,
Yeah.
but they partner us on bigger deals,
Yeah.
on bigger ones, so
I
they.
would love to learn more about those opportunities and what the criteria is so that maybe if there is a way for the community board to help, I will appreciate that. Also, on the community agreements. So when we have all of these developers come and we are asking them, hey, we support the program or the development on the condition that the enforcement for those community agreements, the enforcement for these people to hire local, whether we're asking them to hire MWBE firms to do the painting, you name it. How can we collaborate more and how can we support HPD and how do you actually implement that process once the projects are approved? That's a huge task.
We certainly encourage the community boards to have developers, well, two things, we talk about it. Any project where developer is seeking HPD financing for new construction, as a matter of policy, we require that they contact the community board, inform the community board of what they're doing. If a guy walked in the door tomorrow and says he owns a piece of land on Melrose Avenue and he would like financing from HPD to then build that building there, if we are serious about the project, if we start working with them at some point before it's final, we require him to contact the community board, which almost always means come to the community board, because, we don't tell the community board you have to meet with them, but they almost always will, want that. We tell them that. Very often, I'll be talking to somebody in our finance division, because in those cases where it's private property, so the people who provide the money to the bank for us, they're more involved with the developer than we are in planning. But we will talk about it, and I'll say to them, have they been to the community board? And they'll say, well, we don't think so. I said, well, they have to. And then they'll tell them, you have to go to the community board.
And then they don't show up.
No, but even after they come, because
No,
we've had,
Not if we're
Yeah.
putting financing.
We've had-
They come.
we've had
I've seen it
multiple
happen, but they don't
presentations.
show up at all.
But
If
we
you ever
don't-
have, I'm sorry, if you ever have a case where there's somebody using one of our new construction programs for financing, and they refuse to come to the community board, let me know.
Or they may refuse behind closed doors, but I mean, they just don't show up, is what I'm saying.
Let me know.
They may not refuse publicly, but they just don't show up.
Let me
Thank you
know.
for that, Anthony. We've had a couple of folks come throughout the past 2 years. Some of those projects have started, others have not started. I'm asking, I'm not trying to make anybody get into trouble, but either the community board or HPD, do we keep or the board of president's office, do we keep a record when the projects are passed or not? And we have our community requests, right? Is there some sort of record that says, okay, let's say MDG development is building in the South Bronx, the community approved on the condition that the development is set to start on 2025. The development started. How can we more effectively, or maybe describe the process? How do we actually follow on the community requests, either from HPD or the Board of President's office or from the community board? I mean, I'm asking a question out of ignorance, pardon my ignorance.
Developer comes and to you, and you ask them to come, they come, and you say, okay, we want this, and this. Some of them might be appropriate and some of them may not. I know at a different community board, they would do this a lot. They would make all these conditions. And some of them truthfully just were inappropriate. Like guy wants to build a building over here, and this may not even be getting HPD's financing. Guy wants to build a building here, community board is telling him he's got to donate $5,000 a year to a school over here. So when the developer asks me about something, I said, that's up to you, but I don't suggest you do it. At the same time, there are things that we do want done. Maybe there's a little garden next door to the project, things like that. 425 Grand Concourse, and the councilman got very involved in this as well. They have a public restroom in the building that's not for the building. But it's on that piece of land that's right there next to the park, because the Parks Department wasn't going to put we used to call a
Comfort station.
no, it's housing, it's parking. No offense to my other two people here, but I knew if I try to remember things that a long time ago. So right, when you go to the Parks Department place, the parking is the guy in the building there. So the Parks Department wasn't going to put it there. And we thought that was a really important thing. The councilman did too. And we worked it out. So that when 425 Grand Concourse was built, there is on the side that faces the park, an entrance to get into a restroom.
So you're telling me that it's difficult to enforce and the community has to be pushing so that
It also has to be appropriate.
it also has to be appropriate.
Appropriate under the.
Because you want to know why also those, because someone's got to pay for it. And there's no guarantee that it's going to be the developer, and that it's not coming out of the taxpayers' money, and
I see. Well, my last question, with regards to HPD homeownership programs, you know, I know that wasn't covered under this presentation, but I do know that you have some homeownership programs, for people who wanna, I think, right? I remember.
Come first, like.
Yeah. Yeah, is this program still around?
Which one?
Home first.
Yeah.
Home first.
Yeah, and what's the, I mean, and if you can share information on the criteria that we can disseminate through the community board, I will
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
I would, and I don't mean this facetious, I mean it seriously, I would, and not one city, go into our website. I mean, all of you who are interested, go into our website and just see how it's broken down. You can do a search, you can put in the search home ownership. It'll take you to the sheet that talks about home ownership. If you put in home first, it'll take you to the sheet that talks about home first. It's really, there's so much information. I still keep finding things. I'll go into our website and I'll say, gee, I didn't know that information was here. It's a ton of information about all of these things, and not just about construction, about other things that we do also, like code enforcement and things like that. There's just so much. That's why that's what I said before. We can stand here for a half hour and give you like 2 weeks worth of information.
Mhm.
And we don't pretend that everything we do is always right, but we really, I have to tell you, I'm proud as punch when I drive around, and not only now there's just too many buildings that are privately built without us, and like I said before, that bothers me because they're not affordable. But when I used to drive around, I used to love it. I said, I have something to do with that building. I got something to do with that building. You always
You
think
say that
about
about a lot of
the
them.
people who are like proud of their jobs, what they do.
Mhm.
I mean, look, I'm an old guy at this point. There's a reason I'm still here. I like what I do.
Yeah.
Um,
I want to ask a question. To me, this is the most telling slide, this one.
Mm-hmm.
What's the plan?
I think,
What's the plan for
Well,
the
I
next,
think
because
that's a
we
good
need
question.
so much more housing,
Mhm.
and you have less land. You just said about the
Mhm.
private developers, I mean, that's follow the money kind of a thing. I mean, what is the plan?
I think it's really,
Mhm.
I think that fits in actually with a lot of the points earlier that you were making about like, I don't get anything out of housing.
Right.
It's unfortunate that like, you're absolutely right. Like we aren't building enough affordable housing for the need there is. And a lot of the answer comes at a lot larger level than, just HPD. And I think, the efforts with CHO and for housing opportunity is starting to crack at some of those issues, like why aren't, parts of, deep Brooklyn,
Yeah.
doing any housing, like things like that. But a lot of the resources that HPD has to create new programs, comes at the political level. So
Right.
like council
That's the
members,
problem.
assembly members. So, we would always love to have more money at HPD to do new programs, do bigger things, and a lot of it's advocating for, the types of priorities. If you pass laws to create new programs and stuff like that, we can administer them, and we can, and it's really a lot at the community board level and really talking to elected officials and things like that.
we can't force the owner of a private property to do housing.
Right.
Not even, let alone affordable housing. When the city owns the property, the city does have a say. And I would tell you that every mayor looks for more opportunities, because all those properties that we took in REM, that they really paid the taxes back in the 1970s and 80s, they're almost all gone. So we're constantly looking for other opportunities, other places to build. A lot of our projects that are done, we didn't talk about that, was on NYCHA property. There's a lot of NYCHA developments that have huge parking lots that aren't used, that have areas that are just barbecue pits, and then maybe something could be worked out there. And so NYCHA is constantly looking at its campuses, as they call them, to see which ones have some vacant land that could be used. Mitchell Almonds. Some Mitchell Almonds were built with huge parking lots. So, they look at that. Every city, see, it used to be, 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, somebody would call up and say, there's a vacant lot at this location, what are you doing about it? And we look it up and we say, well, wait a second, that belongs to the police department. And they said, they would say, okay, we understand that, it's the police department. Well, now the police department has to explain, why are they holding on to this vacant lot? Why can't it be used for housing? I would tell you that at any given time, there are, well, a perfect example is some of the projects we did talk about. B2 that Adam is working on. Right now, that has policemen's cars on it. We're going to build, we're going to facilitate housing, the project that he talked about. We're going to be coming back to you because it's going to be a ULER, by the end of the year. And the police will be told they can't stay there, they have to get off. Fire department is in different districts. I know there's a site behind a fire station. The fire department has no interest in doing anything with it. Well, give it to us. We'll offer it. We'll do an RFP for it. We're constantly looking for other sites, for opportunities, and it's hard because it's not so easy. We're running out of sites, but we're and again, like I said, it used to be. We would want to be doing an RFP, and we would come to a community board and say, okay, this is what we have in mind. And they say, oh, no, we want that to be a park. All right, well, now that's not so easy to do, because not that we don't need more parks, but we sure need more housing.
We have 2 more questions.
Yeah,
Anthony?
I want to, if I could try to get the answers to be as succinct as possible, because to manage time. I know that we want to, so that I'm respectful of time. No worries. No, I'm just want to, so my quick questions are, or maybe we can try to figure out this real quickly, is how is the city being able to ensure that when we talked about investment in luxury housing where there's some housing connect units, what is the formulas that are being used to determine what your finances come into play? How many housing connect units go into like that? Because as we look at, we knew this affordability issue and this housing crisis is a long systemic issue.
Right.
So we want to make sure. And we want to make sure that as you do investment, that we're truly trying to make sure that we're engaged.
It used to be that for a lot. This is what's true for a lot of those towers down by the dig in there. That if the developer wanted to build something privately without our financing, but did want to use a certain tax incentive program, it was called 421A. And that was the one that was most often used. And so he would be getting financing from a bank or someplace to build the building itself, but the tax benefit would come through that program. And that program, because it was created by the state legislature, not by the city, it's a public program. So if the developer is going to use that tax program, he had to provide 30% of the units in the building to be affordable. The problem was affordable was defined, we talked about AMIs before. That program said that affordable was defined as up to 130% AMI.
Right.
Now, that was ridiculous. We don't do anything with 130% AMI. We don't even do anything now with, hardly with even 100% AMI. And yet those buildings, all those towers, the arches and the one next to the Third Avenue Bridge, they all have that percentage of units affordable. I don't know if they're paying that 130% or what they are, but those are the ads that we see all the time.
So I want to say that.
So that program, when they expired, the state legislature said this doesn't make sense, so then it expire. They created a new program. I think it's called 485X.
Yep.
And that is going into effect. And for that, and it's a little more complicated than simply giving one number, but basically what it is, it's saying that the units have to be under 80% AMI on average. It can't be 130. So it will be much better situation once that happens. Once that's in effect.
But the number you use, that you said 80, but you said that 50% is you look at communities that doesn't mean.
I'm beginning what percentage of the units have to be, but I know it's a much lower threshold,
No, I'm talking about the AMI. You said that was looks at affordable in certain communities, and our community board, our AMI affordability is below 80%. So when we talk about reasonably conversations
it's more
about
complicated than that. It's not simply saying it's either 80% or above or below. It's a little more complicated. But I'm saying to you that the maximum, instead of being under 30%, it's actually saying it has to be an average of only 80.
Right.
There will be units less than that. There will be units more affordable.
So I would suggest that the community board should be engaged in that negotiation on some level where it's not looked at as complicated because we have competent people on the board that can look at as negotiation happens, especially when, because I think that what we looked at and historically, people, this is not, I want to say in other boards, there were discussions about how these programs were used for financing, but it wasn't comparable to the area where these financiers were using, and developers may have been using these programs just to get the development built, not to meet the housing needs of the community.
All those towers down by the digger there.
Right, so I want to say that. Number two, as the chairperson give me time, so I want to give you time to answer, but I wanted this to go into, my next thing is you look at the RFPs, how are you, what mechanisms are you using to ensure that the RFPs, as it meets into, as you judge what RFPs are winnable RFPs, that the developers come from not just the area, the nonprofit organizations as being service providers, but also being developers that come from at least the city of New York or from the area to ensure that because they understand the fabric of how houses should be built, and also the community about how we should engaging affordability and the population want to make sure they are there. So is there a way where in these instances where RFPs are being built or being used to determine what goes on these properties, that letters of support, while not required, can be insisted upon to ensure that when you are trying to determine on whether or not this is a winnable RFP, the community board, that the community board is the entity that says, yes, we think this is a good developer because the community board thinks so too, because then these organizations are in communication with the community board to make this development.
A couple things through. When we issue an RFP and we get submissions, and typically we'll get, depending on the site, 5, 6, 12 submissions, and then we get reviewed. Anthony has done this. Adam has done a little work on reviewing, be part of the team that reviews these. We definitely give preference to developers who have experience in the system, who understand how programs and how to use them. I don't believe that legally you can limit by residents or anything like that who can apply. I just don't think you can do that. And as far as
that residents, I'm talking about this, like organizations, we have experienced organizations that developers or work with experienced organizations in the district that can to determine, because I know that the city has used Boston and other areas
this has
for
something to do with the
developers.
procurement system. Our review of those submissions is not public. We don't tell anybody, who's applied and who's got scores or whatever. We eventually, of course, we get to the one who wins, but we can't. In fact, the RFP has language that specifically says that no credence will not be given to support letters, be they from a community board or elected officials.
When did that change? Because I know that that was a requirement. I may be going back a little bit decades, but I'm sure that community boards were looked at as an entity that were required.
I can think of one RFP in particular example where we got 10 submissions and 3 of them had support letters.
I know fairly recently they were saying they were looking for the council member wasn't looking for a letter, the council person couldn't support, and fairly recently.
I have told over the years, I have told community boards that don't even bother to have developers who are responding to an RFP come to you for support, because it's not going to matter to us. We can't do that.
When did that go into, I'm asking, when did that go into effect? Did you have it like a decade, 2 decades ago? Has that happened in the past?
We've not taken that into consideration for a real long time. I don't know how long it is that the RFP actually has that language that says no.
Right. I just want to say, because I think that if we want to show that we are doing a couple of things. One, we are meeting you want the community board to understand or the community period, the city to understand there's a dire need. We want people to understand too that the city has all these preferences in play that helps to meet the housing.
It's a matter of fairness. It's also a matter of.
I understand, but let me just complete my statement. That all these things are in check, and I just want the community board. I want the city to know the community board is a partner and not an adversary. And I'm not saying that you're saying that, but I want to also say is that for us to be a partner, for people who live in this community who are responsible either through their role as board members or as committee members to be a partner in that work. It can't just be the council members or other elected officials. It has to be something that helps us in conjunction in a way that says that we have to be the folks who are inheritors of this reality of the housing situation because we live in it. And I know the city wants to engage in some way. And so this education piece is a part of that by educating us in that aspect, because I want to say that developers have been, in my experience, it's not the board talking, this is Mr. Jordan who's lived here for 40 plus years, don't ask me my age, but that use the turnkey affordability pretty easily. The city doesn't put emphasis on saying to developers or who are either applying to RFP or building housing either without financing or building housing free to their own means, to not use turnkey words or buzzwords that get community board support, get community support or whatever. Because if we turn around, we look at it, I'm watching the majority of our calls coming in are either people who live in dilapidated, horrible conditions and in blight, or whether they were in HPD forming building or not, or people who cannot find a place to stay. I have members on my team from volunteers who are real staff people who cannot, whatever our income is, cannot find affordability. And we want to be your partner and not only understanding what things come before us, but being a partner in the nuts and bolts and weeds of how that happens. And I think when the city gets to that part, we can really truly be partners in that. I'm not saying that you're going to spend your lifetime in trying to do that, Ted and team. I'm saying that we want to be a partner in that because it is troublesome when I take a constituent, which I did myself personally, into a tower that use HPD finances, who says, oh, you don't belong here because we have already taken enough of you. And it's not their words. We've taken enough of you at your income rate, even though we use your tax dollars or your city financing to build this development. And until we don't have anything to do about when the next round of Housing Connect apartments will open up. And so this person walks away doubled up in a one-bedroom apartment with her grandmother and her child, and she's trying to find a way. And I know this is multiple stories, and I know you take this home every day, Ted, for decades. I just want to say, how can we be, when we sit before, this education piece is one thing, but as we sit before developers, we need to be serious judges, as the chair has said, to evaluate and how to enforce when people are coming to say, HPD's told us to come here, and that's it. There's nothing else that we can do, but it's a box to check.
The simple answer is we all need to do what we can to get more affordable housing built.
But I just said that we don't want this be a box to check anymore. We want the city to help us to be an entity that's taken seriously as we all together try to figure out a way how we be able to have answers to the housing crisis.
Before every RFP, Adam described, there's a visiting report that gets put together, and we ask the community boards to help with this, to put the questionnaires out, leaflets and everything, meetings, workshops. We want to hear from the community. And then after somebody gets picked, but if what you're saying is that, Joe and Joe developer, is willing to do all kinds of nice things for the community, we'd like you to pick him, that's not gonna happen.
But I guess to Ted's point is the part where you can get super involved is that community visioning portion, because we take it very seriously, the community visioning. If a developer is completely ignoring the community visioning report, the one that, we have the workshop for, we come present to you, like that is, if a developer is not thinking about what the community wants, that's a negative in reviewing that application. And again, to Ted's point, that you have past experience, either building in New York, building in the Bronx, even building in your community district. So while we cannot accept, as Ted's saying, like you should pick this development team, there's other ways for you to get your priorities. And if they're a good development team, then they should think about, what is the community saying in this community visioning report?
And I'll tell you just a quick story. In another community district, several years back, there was a city-owned site that we wanted to offer through an RFP. And a development team went to the community board. Community board knew them, liked them, and said to HPD, we'd like you to give that site to this team. And we said, no, you can't do that.
What if
And
we
the
say as a
council
team,
member-
what if we say as a team, HPD says
Look,
80 units,
And,
and we say, that's not enough.
and the council,
That's not enough.
and the
What happens
council
then?
member
What happens
at
then,
that
Ted?
time, councilman at that time in that area said to our commissioner that I want you to pick this site for this team. And our commissioner said, no, we can't do that. And this person said, well, then when you have to do ULURP, I'm gonna be against the ULURP. And our commissioner said, I'm sorry, we can't do that.
But I'm asking again, because you didn't describe the formula that's used to determine if I take your Ella funding, there's nothing that you didn't mention when you didn't say, well, you have to provide this much of units out of, if you build 100 units using my Ella funding, get 30%, I don't know if that
Oh,
adds
if
into
I'm sorry, if
how
what you're
many
saying
units?
is, if what you're, okay, the distribution that we talked about, that in the building, you can have, let's say, some units at 30% AMI, some at 50, some at 60, some at 80, something like that. And you can have a building, because typically the buildings that we're doing in the Bronx have that range from 30 to 80. Now, some buildings will be mostly more like 60 and 80. Other buildings will be mostly the 30 and 50. So it's the weighting of it. Some are weighted more toward, say, moderate income, and some weighted a little more toward low income. So if you're saying that the community would like, for a particular location, that there'd be more units at the lower levels, that we could consider. And we ourselves might agree, if that's what you're saying.
I'm not asking for tulips instead of
No, I'm just saying,
grass
if
on
you
the
want
floor.
more low-income units,
I'm asking that,
yes.
how does the city say to the community board, and I'm sorry, I know that a colleague, and I know that we're at the time, thank you, Chair, is saying that we want to be a serious integral partner of the sincere enforcement, because you haven't talked about where the enforcement piece is, to ensuring that the reality of handling this housing crisis is something that the community board has an integral part in ensuring. And if that is something that the city takes serious, that you are a partner, you said, no, you can't talk about parking. I'm just giving an example. Parking is not a, if it says, no, you don't get to choose the developer. No, you can't ask for red tulips and then blue tulips. No, it's just that, and the city makes a decision on everything because of their finances, our tax dollars, their financing, that makes up those determinations. Where do you see us as an integral partner besides the visioning? Because you could say, well, out of the 10 visioning things you picked, you got 3, so you're doing pretty good. We need to build this housing emergency, so go with it. We can't decide whether or not you use a partner that comes in from the community who understands the fabric of the community to build this housing. You might pick somebody from Boston. I'm just giving hypotheticals in there, and I know this.
Well, that's not
I want to say,
hypothetical, that's happened.
where is this community board and just hearing them to check a box and doing our ULUP process and passing City of Yes and doing all these things?
And
How
Anthony,
are we integral? How are we?
it
This
does
is my
happen.
comment.
It happens through
How's
the
it
community
happen?
vision reports before an RFP is even
So you're
issued.
saying 100% of the visioning that we talk about in this thing are used in the RFP?
I can't say 100%, because what if in the community vision report, the majority of people say that they want a swimming pool in the building? No, we're not gonna do that.
Well, you look at the luxury housing, they have swimming
But
pools in
that's
the
not being paid
building.
with taxpayer money.
I'm just and those people don't have access to those ideas. It's like I'm just saying that while I appreciate everything that the city is doing, and I don't want to have an adversarial on the record conversation. I apologize, Chair. I just want to say that I think the take back is, how can we think harder outside the box instead of a cookie cutter thing of how we fit in each neighborhood to ensure that the community has a voice, like how much supportive housing goes into the community, how many things. I think the community has. I just think that it is important that we have that thought process as we look at and not working, because I think that you guys are doing an amazing job. But the hardest emphasis is in place. I just think that, and as a DM, I hear this all the time from our constituents, our staff, and the board members. When you hear affordable for who, when you hear, I've been on the list for 10 years, when you hear.
But part of this tonight was to try to explain.
I understand that, and I'm just saying that I want to encourage us to have more conversation about
And
that.
Maybe there's a
About that.
follow-up to
Yes.
our training
Yes.
tonight.
Actually, can I say
Uh-huh.
something about that? That's actually a really good point. We as the planning team have, we come to you for like things like RFPs and the land use. If there's a certain like very specific aspect of our work that you want, like we have a whole like team that does like tenant protection training. If you like, we can get someone who knows, just about home, we have, or to our best of our abilities, we can get you more like finite answers from, our finance people, because, we try to answer the finance questions as best we can, but
Our marketing unit
Yeah.
will come and talk about Housing Connect.
So let's regroup as a
I
committee.
think Michael.
But first, before we go into our last question, we're gonna regroup as a committee to assess some of the things that, after what we learned today, some of the concerns we have, a few next steps. I think that's gonna be appropriate for this team. And before we go into the last question, Adam, Winnie, Astrid, Ted, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much.
Can someone take our picture?
Of course. Our last question,
Let's take it with the committee members.
we're gonna take a picture with the committee.
Oh, nice.
Yes,
Can
and
you put
let's have
the cover sheet back up on the
yes,
screen?
let's have our last question of the evening.
Just to go back to, Susan's earlier point regarding, how we have a lot of supportive housing. I agree 100% or 1,000%.
Supposed to, affordable.
Right, well, HPD, I feel too easily facilitates supportive housing in this district, probably also in Community Board 3, in general in the South Bronx. It would be great that not happen. I will advocate for the community and say that shouldn't continue, because it does bring a unique set of problems that we have to deal with, because there is no accountability, unfortunately, with, which what the DM was sort of alluding to, with these developments that they just, they do it, they use taxpayer money, and then it's over, right? On that note, of the 5,625 new affordable units constructed here since 2014, how many of those units were supportive housing?
Okay, I don't know offhand.
Definitely not a majority.
Or what's the number?
I don't know.
yeah,
I mean, it might not be 51%, but it could be 49, and that's not a majority.
It's not, okay, and then we didn't actually see the numbers. A a project that gets built, we're funding through our supportive housing program. 60% of the units are the formerly homeless. The other 40% of the units are just general population. They go through the lottery.
Well, we've seen projects that's not the case, and that's on record.
Well, I again, if you have that, then let us know, because that is the way it works. On top of that, though, and I think some of you know this, there was a law passed some years ago. The sponsor was Councilman Salamanca, and it says that for every project that gets city funding through these programs, at least 15% of the units have to be for the formerly homeless, have to be the referrals from Department of Homeless Services. That's the law. So yes, if a building gets built, whether it's La Central, Via Verde, whatever these are, 15% of the units have to be formerly homeless.
We're gonna take our picture, I'm sorry. Before.
And do you want to do it like this with the picture, with the
Yeah.
background, correct?
Why not?
Okay. So,
I thought we were gonna stand.
I did too, but it's okay, it's all good.
so we have the background. And then we're gonna try to do a closer one to the background to that.
Siéntate, mami. One, two, three.
Perfect, thank you.
Good, you can post it on LinkedIn now. No, the community, the community board Instagram.
No, I was just gonna add that, again, to get to the district manager's point, we've seen time and time again that the advice of the community, be it the community board or whoever has an input, it gets totally ignored regarding supportive housing. So it would be great to see that change to some degree.
Or some of that data, right? Like, we're gonna elaborate some of the questions that you mentioned. I think those questions are valid, because sometimes when we talk to people about statistics or proportions, like X percentage, that has an impact, but the actual number, right? And I know you have some data available, Perhaps
We would love that number.
makes a
I'll give you
better
an
impact.
example.
Mhm.
Melrose Commons, which is half Ward 1, half Ward 3. There've been 30 new construction projects in Melrose Commons since 2000 altogether. 3 are supportive housing of the 30.
And I worked on supportive housing sites. Susan has been involved in supportive housing sites. Those are not necessarily the easiest ones to develop or to put together that proposal. So I don't know if the developers are more eager to put forward that type of proposal versus others,
I would say they are.
right?
Well, one of the reasons is, because at this point, more supportive housing is done on private sites
Mhm.
than on city sites. And one of the reasons is because truthfully, and this is one of the reasons why in the South Bronx in general, the land is cheaper.
Mhm.
So
On
that.
the city, on the private
Private
land.
The private land is cheaper in the South Bronx than the North Bronx.
Mhm.
So-
It's cheaper in the South Bronx than in the North Bronx.
But therein lies the problem, where you have a heavy concentration
Yeah,
of that type of
it's-
housing.
And we are more than happy to do a supportive housing building in Throgs Neck, in Riverdale, wherever.
Do you
That's
offer
not gonna
them?
fly.
Yeah.
Do you offer
Don't
them
do more here.
Well, but we can't make any private owner do anything specific. We
Like-
can't,
But when does HPD say enough is enough? Like, there's already too many, no more, we're not
truthfully,
accepting
when
anymore.
there aren't 60,000 people every night in shelters.
Very politically correct answer.
But it's a correct answer, we can't,
It's not, it's not.
People didn't
acceptable
always
answer
know.
for us. That's the problem.
people didn't always know how many people in the shelters. And then, not that many years ago, all of a sudden it came out that there was 60,000 people every night. People were like, that's crazy. In New York City, 60,000 people, not counting people out on the streets, 60,000 people are homeless?
And
That's crazy.
this is why we say, when you use financing, if you bargain harder when using the financing to say, you gotta give me more for my money. And this is when you use any financing, whether it's luxury or whatever, then you truly are talking about bringing down those numbers, because, and that's what they're suggesting, is the bargain. I know that we have the desire to create this affordability or create housing units, but I'm sure that everybody needs those dollars to help make the financing work. I'm just saying I would love to learn more at another conversation, Chair, about how the bargaining happens with financing, and is it equitable across the city when we bargain?
I will tell you one last statement, and this is,
This is our last statement.
This is-
for the
But
night.
no, I have one last thing.
this is
We're
my,
done.
It's interesting because
this is my epitaph. You can put this on my gravestone.
Oh, God.
I've
don't
always
say
looked
that.
at,
No.
in terms of what my job is. My job is to convey to the communities what the needs are of the city. And my job is also to convey to the city, to HPD, what the desires and interests are of the community. And I have tried to balance that. I can assure you that there were times that, we argue things, we don't just, okay, good. You win some, you lose some. But, if do you want to know if people in higher levels are aware that people in the South Bronx are not happy about the amount of supportive housing? I assure you they are aware.
Yeah, but they don't care.
It's not that they don't care, it's that there's still 60,000 people in the
I know,
shelters
but
every
like,
night.
why all
Really,
here?
but if that was the
Because-
case, they would have put all of them affordable housing, not half of them 4,000, 5,000. I have apartments down the block from me that are $5,000 a month.
Yeah.
If that was the case,
Not-
they wouldn't do that.
But that's private.
Not financed
That's not
by
private.
us.
That was all
They
private.
housing connect.
Oh, they don't have.
They-
No, but those are the private sites, the private properties that are using private money. And the only reason that any units are through Housing Connect is because they're using that tax program.
Yeah. I'm gonna advocate one last thing, is we need more 2 and 3 bedroom apartments.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
know,
two and
but,
three, two and three, please.
We
Two and three.
cannot, the families cannot raise families.
Yeah.
We get
one
studios
bedroom.
and ones,
It's
it's
insane.
insane. It's crazy, and it's follow the money.
Yeah.
The more apartments, the more money for the developer. And I'm just saying that we are struggled. I get people who are in Lisbon 20 years to get a freaking transfer. By the time they get called, their kids are all out of the house already. It's a terrible thing. As planners, we've got to think, how do we build our families that not everybody's a single, not everybody can be in
Okay, I'll
two
say
hundred and
two
fifty square feet.
The average household in the city and in the Bronx at this point is only 2 point something people. So the average household is small everywhere. And the answer is that
But in reality, they're not. There's a lot of, there's
if
a
there's
lot
a
of.
choice, if there's a choice of, in a particular site of, let's say, developer comes in, has a site, wants financing, and let's say it's 100 apartments, or let's say he can do 100 apartments, and lots of them are 2s and 3s. But if he does more studios than 1s, he can maybe do 150 apartments. That means 150 households are getting housing, then instead of only 100.
I'm just saying,
I'm
telling you,
I'm
I'm
giving
gonna
you
tell
reasons.
you,
I'd
we
like to
manage
agree.
33,000 units, okay? And I'm gonna tell you, the need for 2s and 3s is overwhelming,
I understand.
overwhelming.
The city, I think, also kind of agrees with your point in the sense that I think the mayor announced I forget all the titles for the CVS for
City of
families.
Yes House, City of Yes for families.
Yeah, and I think a part of that, there's an emphasis on including more 2 bedrooms in buildings.
You know, NYCHA back in the day, NYCHA had 4 bedroom, because imagine a lot of NYCHAs, they had 3s, 4s, and 5s.
Yes.
People raise their families.
Yes, they
I mean,
did.
when you think what NYCHA really did, I mean, that's a whole other
Well, that's public
topic.
housing, that's
Yeah,
that's
I
exactly the point.
understand, but what I'm saying is, we have to, if you want advocate, what Michael said, supportive housing, we need more families to be able to raise their families here. They're crowded up, they're in difficult
I know.
situations.
You know,
It really is.
Domestic
I mean, it's
violence,
very
to health
sad for me.
issues.
Huh?
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Or simply, you
Or-
have
I-
people with
Or we look at
three
the analogy
children.
of why there's
I'm not saying
60,000,
all
if we look at why there's
3 bedrooms,
60,000
but why
numbers,
do we
are there families in shelters?
Get 100 units, we've got 5 3 bedrooms. Okay, really? You did me a favor, 5? And then there is seniors, I get like, when we have meetings, no, even with the seniors, they're berserk.
We push
They
that there to
they're
be,
really hospital rooms.
we push
That's what
that
they
to at
really have
least be
become.
more
Yes.
1 bedroom.
Winnie, I'm just being
I
honest.
agree.
Yes.
It's
Look,
sad.
When my younger brother was born, we were a family of 5 in a 1 bedroom for a year. And then we moved into a NYCHA project. I grew up in a 3 bedroom.
Castleville.
Because there was a thought process, I mean, talk about planning. There was a process to say, we're going to take care of their families. It's not it's not mainly 3s and 4s, but they built those to accommodate those families. Because we have to think broadly.
I understand. All I can say is, and these aren't the exact right numbers, but if the city says that after a year, when a year is finished, that they produced 20 homes for 20,000 households, not new homes. If you did more larger units, that means less units, maybe then only 15,000 got new households, new homes instead of 20,000.
Okay, but maybe
That's
we
one
have
of
to
the
look at
reasons.
quality versus quantity, since we
Yes,
still have
I
60,000
agree with
homeless.
that.
Where are we
I
getting all
agree
the
with
homeless?
that.
I mean,
Yes.
as many homeless as we've housed,
I-
the number's not going down. It's not going down, and somehow it's the burden on us.
It's a balancing act.
No, I don't think
I'm
there is
gonna
a
say that
balance. is not
I am going
being
to
created
call
under those
to
circumstances.
adjourn, I'm gonna make a call to adjourn the meeting. This
Yes,
has been
and we
very
thank you. You guys
productive.
have been amazing.
Thank you
Stay
so
here
much.
all night.
And you have been a huge Bronx advocate. I mean, all of you did a great job, and I appreciate